Imagine, you carry within you the legacy of a long-lost people, a people we knew nothing about until recently, and who may have been closer to us than any other extinct species. This people is the Denisovans. Their existence was discovered thanks to a tiny finger bone found in a Siberian cave. And since then, each new discovery has only deepened the mystery. Genetics has shown that the Denisovans were not just distant relatives, but close neighbors whose traces still live on in the DNA of modern humans. They inhabited vast territories of Asia, but we know almost nothing about what they look like, how they lived, or why they disappeared. Their story is one of the most intriguing chapters in the book of human evolution, and today we will try to read it. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how a single tooth changed our understanding of who we are and where we came from. Our story begins in 2008 in Denisova Cave in Altai, Siberia. A group of archaeologists, sifting through centuries-old layers of earth, stumbled upon a tiny bone fragment. It was just the phalanx of a little girl's little finger. It seemed like an ordinary find, but the team decided to send it to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany for genetic analysis. The results stunned the entire scientific world. The DNA extracted from this bone did not belong to Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. It was a completely new, previously unknown species of hominid. It was named Denisovan or Denisovan man. This discovery was a real breakthrough. For the first time, a new species was identified not by its skull, but by its genetic material. It marked the beginning of a new era in paleoanthropology, where DNA analysis technology became as important as an archaeologist's shovel. Scientists extracted mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through the maternal line, from the bone, and compared it with the genetic material of modern humans and Neanderthals. The results showed that Denisovan mitochondrial DNA differs from both groups. It formed a completely separate branch on the genetic tree, which separated from the branch leading to modern humans and Neanderthals about 1 million years ago. This discovery prompted scientists to take a fresh look at all the fossil finds made in Asia and wonder whether some of them belong to Denisovans. Most importantly, it showed that our understanding of human evolution was too simplistic. We used to think of it as a tree with a few main branches, but now it's clear that it was a dense and tangled bush where many species coexisted and possibly interbred. The Denisovans were one of those branches which, although they did not survive to the present day, left their mark on our own DNA. Now that we have this incredible genetic information, what else can we learn about the Denisovans in the near future? Share your ideas in the comments. After the existence of the Denisovans was established, scientists began to search for their traces in the genomes of modern humans, and they found them. It turned out that Denisovan genes are present in the populations of East and Southeast Asia, as well as in the indigenous peoples of Australia and Oceania. The highest amount of Denisovan DNA, up to 6%, was found in Papuans and Australian Aborigines. These genes gave them unique adaptations. For example, Tibetans inherited the EPAS1 gene from the Denisovans, which allows them to live and work at high altitudes where oxygen is very scarce. This fact proves that our Homo sapiens ancestors interbred with Denisovans in the past. This was not just accidental interbreeding, but full-fledged interaction between the two species. According to geneticists' estimates, these interbreedings occurred at different times and in different places. The first major mixing could have happened about 50,000 years ago, when our ancestors first encountered Denisovans in Asia. The second wave of hybridization may have occurred about 30,000 years ago, which explains the presence of Denisovan genes in the peoples of Oceania, who apparently encountered another Denisovan population on their migration route. Scientists suggest that the Denisovan legacy is not limited to adaptation to high altitudes. There is evidence that some genes responsible for the immune system and metabolism were also inherited from Denisovans. This could have helped our ancestors survive in new, unfamiliar environments, encountering new viruses and bacteria. Thus, we carry within us particles of an extinct species. And this is not just a curious fact from paleoanthropology. It is direct evidence that our ancestors were not the only branch of evolution, but rather part of a complex network of interactions that led to the emergence of modern humanity. This reminds us that our history is much more complex than we are used to thinking. But where is Denisovan DNA most evident in modern humans? You can simply look at people's faces and see the shadows of the past. In what exactly? Let's talk about it right now. The main mystery of the Denisovans is that we know almost nothing about what they look like. We only have a few bone fragments, a phalanx, 2 teeth, and a fragment of a skull. But these findings already give us some ideas. One of the teeth found in the cave was incredibly large, indicating a massive physique. And a recently discovered skull fragment showed that the Denisovans may have had a very massive jaw. But the most unique artifact associated with the Denisovans was found in Tibet. It is a jawbone that, according to genetic analysis, belonged to a Denisovan. It is 160,000 years old. This discovery confirmed that Denisovans live not only in Siberia, but also at high altitudes. Their adaptation to hypoxia, low oxygen content in the air, was not accidental, but an important element of survival. Despite the scarcity of fossils, scientists are attempting to reconstruct the appearance of Denisovans using genetic data. For example, DNA methylation analysis allows them to determine the activity of genes responsible for physical traits. Using this technology, researchers were able to predict that Denisovans most likely had dark skin, dark hair, and brown eyes, which distinguishes them from light-skinned and light-eyed Neanderthals. These traits suggest that they were well adapted to life in Asia. In addition, genetic data indicates that Denisovans had a broad jaw and low forehead. These features, characteristic of archaic hominids, are confirmed by the discovery of a jawbone in Tibet. All this data, gathered bit by bit, paints a picture of a powerful, resilient species well adapted to life in harsh conditions. They may have been larger than Neanderthals. This discovery forces us to rethink how we imagine our distant relatives. Denisovans were not simply Asian Neanderthals, as some thought. They were a unique and separate species with their own anatomical and genetic characteristics. And although we do not have a single complete skeleton, each new bone fragment or genetic discovery, like pieces of a mosaic, brings us closer to unraveling their appearance. The Denisovans disappeared from the face of the Earth about 50,000 years ago. What led to their disappearance remains a mystery. Were they displaced by the more adaptable Homo sapiens? Or were they assimilated into our population? Perhaps their extinction was linked to sudden climate changes to which they were unable to adapt. This period coincides with the peak of Homo sapiens migration from Africa. Our ancestors, armed with more sophisticated tools and complex social organization, quickly populated new territories. Neanderthals, who coexisted with us in Europe, died out around the same time. Perhaps the Denisovans suffered the same fate. However, unlike Neanderthals, the genetic trace of Denisovans was not simply blurred in our DNA, but became an integral part of it. This suggests that their disappearance was not only the result of competition, but also of large-scale hybridization. Modern research shows that Denisovan DNA has been preserved in peoples living in the territories where they are believed to have lived. This may indicate that the Denisovans did not simply disappear, but were dissolved into our population. But this does not explain why their own culture and physical characteristics have not been preserved. Perhaps they simply got tired of their uniqueness and decided to join the most successful species? Or was it not their decision? Today, there are several key hypotheses explaining their disappearance. The first is competitive displacement. As Homo sapiens populations grew and expanded their range, they may have simply taken over the resources used by the Denisovans, such as hunting grounds and campsites. The second hypothesis is assimilation through interbreeding. In this scenario, the Denisovans did not die out, but gradually merged into our population, passing on their genes. The Homo sapiens populations that arrived in Asia may have been more numerous, and their genes dominated. The third hypothesis is environmental factors. Climate change could have destroyed the ecosystems to which the Denisovans were adapted, leading to a decline in their numbers and ultimately to extinction. Each of these hypotheses has its own merits. However, the most likely scenario, supported by both genetic and archaeological data, is a combination of these factors. Homo sapiens brought with them new technologies, a more complex social structure, and possibly greater adaptability to change. This combination of factors could have led to the Denisovan population, despite their unique adaptations, being unable to compete in the long term. However, before they disappeared, They managed to pass on part of their valuable genetic heritage to our ancestors, thus leaving their mark on history. What if the Denisovans had not died out but continued to evolve? What would our reality be like today? Stay with us to find out the answer to this question. The territory inhabited by the Denisovans was vast. From cold Siberia to the hot tropics of Southeast Asia, traces of them have been found in the DNA of the peoples living in these territories. This suggests that the Denisovans were an incredibly adaptable and resilient species, capable of surviving in a wide variety of climatic conditions. They were the first to settle these territories. This incredible geographical breadth, spanning both the harsh Siberian taiga and the hot tropical jungles, testifies to their remarkable adaptability. While Neanderthals remained mainly in Europe and the Middle East, and Homo sapiens were just beginning their migration from Africa, the Denisovans had already mastered a huge part of the continent, which speaks to their high intelligence and ability to survive in unfamiliar ecosystems. Their ability to live in high altitudes, confirmed by the discovery of a jawbone in Tibet, is a striking example of this adaptability. They lived in conditions that would have been deadly for other species, and perhaps this is what allowed them to survive for so long. Today we can trace this path by studying the genetics of modern peoples. For example, the inhabitants of Papua New Guinea and other islands in Oceania, who are descendants of one of the first waves of Homo sapiens migration from Africa, have the highest content of Denisovan DNA. This means that their ancestors encountered and interbred with Denisovans in Southeast Asia, which was probably one of the last refugees of this mysterious species. This trace in their genes serves as a kind of passport for the Denisovans, indicating their migration routes. Their endurance and adaptability force us to rethink many established ideas about human evolution. Instead of considering Homo sapiens the only successful species to have colonized Eurasia, we must acknowledge that Denisovans were no less, and perhaps even more, successful pioneers on this continent. The largest collection of Denisovan remains was found in Denisova Cave. But the most surprising thing is that traces of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were also found there. This suggests that these three species coexisted in the same place, possibly for thousands of years. This is not just a hypothesis, but a proven fact, confirmed by genetic analysis of ancient DNA. One of the most striking discoveries made in this cave was a small bone fragment that belonged to a teenage girl who lived about 90,000 years ago. Genetic analysis showed that she had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. This is direct evidence that interbreeding between these two species was not only possible, but did occur. This discovery, dubbed Deni, shattered all previous notions of strict interspecies barriers and showed that our ancestors lived in a world full of hybridization. Denisova Cave, located at the crossroads of Asia and Europe, served as a kind of evolutionary crossroads where different hominid species met and interacted. Here they could exchange not only genes, but also possibly technologies, ideas, and cultural practices. The archaeological layers in the cave contain traces of various cultures, from primitive stone tools to complex jewelry, indicating the long and rich history of its inhabitants. The fact that Denisovans, Neanderthals, and our ancestors lived in the same place raises many questions. How did they interact? Were these peaceful contacts or hostilities? What role did these interactions play in shaping our own evolution? Perhaps we inherited not only genes from them, but something else as well. What if the Denisovans did not die out, but became part of us, and we simply cannot find all their traces? Let's talk about it right now. Genetic analysis has shown that Neanderthals and Denisovans diverged as species about 400,000 years ago. They had a common ancestor who left Africa and settled in Eurasia. This makes them sister species to each other. The study of mitochondrial DNA has shown that the last common ancestor of Denisovans, Neanderthals, and humans was Homo heidelbergensis. About 400,000 years ago, the population of this species split. One branch headed west to Europe, where it eventually evolved into Neanderthals, while the other moved east to Asia, becoming the ancestors of the Denisovans. Although Neanderthals and Denisovans existed in different regions, they shared common features inherited from their common ancestor. For example, both species had a massive build, which allowed them to survive in the harsh climate of the Ice Age. However, their paths diverged not only geographically, but also evolutionarily. Each species developed its own unique traits to adapt to local conditions. Neanderthals had shorter, wider skulls, while Denisovans had larger jaws and teeth. These differences, revealed by genetic and paleoanthropological data, show that the evolution of hominids was a process of constant diversification and adaptation. Of particular interest is the hybridization between these two species. The discovery of Denny, a girl whose father was a Denisovan and whose mother was a Neanderthal, is direct evidence that these two species, although genetically different, could interbreed. This suggests that, despite their long separation, they remained close enough to produce fertile offspring. This discovery has radically changed our understanding of the biological boundaries between species. Thus, Denisovans and Neanderthals are not just extinct species. They represent two branches of one large evolutionary tree, and their history is inextricably linked to each other and to us. A discovery in Tibet is of particular significance. It proves that Denisovans were able to survive in high-altitude conditions. This discovery, the jawbone of an adult Denisovan, was found in the Baishya Karst cave on the Tibetan Plateau, at an altitude of more than 3,200 meters above sea level. Although the bone itself was found back in 1980, its origin was not established until 2019, when scientists were able to extract collagen proteins from it and analyze them. This confirmed that it belonged to a Denisovan who lived about 160,000 years ago. This discovery is a real breakthrough because, first, it confirmed for the first time the existence of Denisovans outside the Altai region, and second, it showed that they were the first hominids to successfully adapt to life in the highlands. For Homo sapiens, who settled on the Tibetan Plateau much later, living at such an altitude is a huge physiological challenge. With low oxygen levels, people can suffer from hypoxia, which leads to a number of serious health problems. However, modern Tibetans have a unique genetic adaptation that allows them to use oxygen efficiently. Studying their genome has shown that they inherited this adaptation from Denisovans, specifically the EPAS1 gene, which is responsible for the body's response to low oxygen levels. Thus, the discovery in Tibet is not just a bone, it is physical evidence that the Denisovans were not only widespread, but also an extremely adaptable species that was able to colonize even the most inhospitable regions of the Earth. It also highlights that our own evolution is closely linked to the stories of other, now extinct species. Not only bones, but also tools and jewelry that may have belonged to the Denisovans were found in Denisova Cave. This is one of the most intriguing aspects of the Denisovans' history. In addition to skeletal remains, thousands of artifacts were found in the cave, including stone tools, bone tips, needles, and jewelry made from mammoth tusks and cave bear claws. The most amazing artifact found in the layers belonging to the Denisovans is considered to be a bracelet made of chlorite. This bracelet was carved and polished with incredible precision and has a drilled hole, which indicates a high level of technological skill that was thought to be characteristic only of Homo sapiens much later. These findings force us to rethink our ideas about the cultural development of ancient hominids. For a long time, it was believed that only Homo sapiens were capable of the complex, abstract thinking required to create jewelry and sophisticated tools. However, the artifacts from Denisova Cave tell a different story. They show that Denisovans possess complex behaviors that may have included artistic expression and symbolism. Some scientists, of course, dispute that these artifacts belong specifically to the Denisovans. They suggest that the jewelry and advanced tools could have been created by our ancestors, Homo sapiens, who lived in the same cave, and that they simply ended up in the Denisovan layers. However, this debate itself highlights how difficult it is to separate the cultural heritage of different species when they coexisted in the same territory. Nevertheless, even if these decorations were created by our ancestors, the very fact that they coexisted with the Denisovans opens the door to new research. Perhaps they exchanged not only genes, but also technologies, which explains why some of the Denisovan tools were so similar to those used by our ancestors. This was not just a chance encounter, but perhaps the beginning of cultural interaction that made us who we are today. The history of the Denisovans is a reminder that human evolution was complex and multifaceted. We are not the only line that survived. The The discovery of the Denisovans has forced us to rethink our place on the evolutionary tree. We can no longer consider ourselves the only branch that emerged from Africa and populated the entire world. Instead, we were just one of several hominid lineages that coexisted, interacted, and competed with each other. Genetic research has shown that our ancestors interbred not only with Neanderthals in Europe, but also with Denisovans in Asia, and possibly with other, as yet undiscovered species. This means that we carry the genetic heritage of not one, but several now extinct species. For example, genes inherited from Denisovans gave Tibetans the ability to live in high altitudes and gave the inhabitants of Oceania unique genes responsible for the immune system. This is direct evidence that our survival and adaptation to new conditions would have been impossible without the genetic contribution of other species. This makes us not just Homo sapiens, but a kind of palimpsest, an ancient manuscript on which new text is written over the old. Thus, the story of the Denisovans is not just a chapter about an extinct people. It is a chapter about ourselves. It shows that we are the result of an incredibly complex and convoluted process involving different species, different populations, and different genes. It reminds us that we are much more diverse and rich than we thought. In this light, the disappearance of the Denisovans ceases to be a tragedy. It becomes part of our shared, incredible history. What if the Denisovans are not just an extinct species, but an integral part of our own history? How does this discovery change your view of humanity? The story of the Denisovans is more than just a scientific discovery. It is a reminder that our own history is much more complex and multifaceted than we could have imagined. Their genes, living on in us, are not just a scientific fact, but evidence that our ancestors were not the only intelligent beings who struggled for survival. This suggests that we may carry the legacy of several now extinct species that, like us, sought to live and adapt. Perhaps their disappearance was not a defeat, but rather part of a complex, convoluted process that led to the emergence of modern humanity. While we search for answers, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.